Okay, folks, so good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Kat McGregor, and I'm here tonight on behalf of the Farm Advisory Service, along with my colleague Kathleen Gunn, that you should be able to see on the screen. And we're here tonight to deliver tonight's meeting on is an agri-environment scheme for you. So just before we kick off with the slides and run through everything, I'm hoping everybody's quite au fait with Zoom and knows how to work it. But folks, if not, if you have any questions that you want to ask throughout the evening, anything you want to know, you can either type it into the chat function on your screen or on the Q&A option. Now, if you use the chat function, you can decide whether to let everybody see your question, or you can just direct it at myself or Kathleen. If you put it in the Q&A, everybody will be able to see what you're typing. So either way, we will try and get through all the questions. We'll probably leave them to the end though, folks, until we get to the QA session just at the very end. So yeah, hopefully everybody's okay with that. Okay, so I'm just going to move on. So I'm not sure if everybody on the call tonight, I know quite a few names that have registered, some I don't know. I'm not sure if folk are already in a scheme or maybe thinking about a scheme or really not sure what is AICS or EECS, some people refer to it as. So our plan this evening is to explain what the environmental scheme actually is, things that you need to think about before applying for the scheme. Kathleen's then going to take you through the land management options and what's all involved. And we're also going to touch on the organic options. Kathleen will pass back to me then, and we'll talk a little bit about the application process, scoring, and then move on to any questions. So hopefully you'll get something out of tonight, guys, whether it be a little bit of information, clarity on something, or a decision whether an environmental scheme is for you or not. So that's our kind of rough agenda. Pretty flexible. If the questions come in, guys, we can go through whatever folk want to know. So moving on. AICS or EECS, what exactly is it? It's an Agri-Environment Climate Scheme. The Scottish Government's been running schemes for a number of years. This is not new, and this scheme is not new, folks. But it is open at the moment, and the background behind it is to promote land management practices that is going to protect and enhance our environment, basically, that we live in. It's also to improve the water quality around you, and also to look at managing flood risks and mitigate and adapt to climate change. It's the buzz at the moment. It's what everybody's obviously talking about. There's also the option to look at improving public access and the preservation of historic sites if you have any sites on your land that you farm. So that's a little bit about just what the environment scheme is about. But if it's something that you're thinking about, folks, or something you don't even know where to start with, there's a few questions you should really ask yourself. The scheme itself might fit, but does it fit your farm, and does it fit your farming practices and your enterprises? You need to take almost a step back and have a wee think about if you're the way that you're stocked. Are you intensively stocked? Is there a little bit of wiggle room on the land that you have? How do you graze your land? And what rules and possible restrictions that being in a scheme might cause for the way that you farm. An environmental scheme is a 5-year commitment, so it's not like you can join it and then change your mind halfway through, think, oh, I'd rather do this, or I want to do that, or I want to pull out. There'd be consequences in doing so. So quite a few questions to ask yourself. For anyone that's on the call tonight that is already in a scheme or been in a scheme before, you'll maybe know a little bit more about what those restrictions are and the the criteria that has to be met against what the habitats are that you're managing. So other considerations you need to think about, folks, is how much grass do you need for your farming enterprise that you have, whether it be cattle, sheep, or any other form of livestock. Do you make silage or hay? How much do you need? The quality that you want to make of your silage. You also need to consider if you have any seasonal land, or if you have any kind of rented land that you have. Is this in a scheme? Can it go in a scheme? Are you going to have it for that 5-year duration? So again, other things that you need to just be aware of before you start the application process. Again, sorry, Kathleen's going to touch on some of the restrictions, but can you farm around the restrictions? You know, can you make it work for the way that you farm, or is it just going to be too much red tape that you're not going to be able to work around what the options are for the habitats that you want to manage? You also need to think about lambing for those that have a lot of sheep, your turnout when you lamb, what fields you use, and can you possibly maybe adjust your stock numbers, whether it be greater or lower, to meet the restrictions and the criteria that's needed. So a few things to think about, and Caithness's going to touch on some payment amounts as she goes through some of the habitats, which makes it sound, you know, really worthwhile for a lot of people. But depending how you farm and what you farm, then you might have to take a step back and think, you know, can you make it work? Hopefully, but can you make it work? The timelines. So at the moment, this application round opened 3 weeks ago, just at the end of January, and it has a closing date of the 7th of June. And that's for applications that will go in for this year to be considered to start January 2024. It starts on the 1st of January. And the likelihood is, or the hope is, that you would know ahead of that date if your application was successful or not. It is a points-based scoring system to get into the scheme. And you need to be aware that any management payments that you are expecting for any capital, and again, Kathleen will touch on this, you won't get paid them until 2025. And it's the same with any capital payments. Capital work has to be completed in the first year and then will be paid out. So that's the timelines around the existing scheme that is open. So what can you do? How do you know what you're eligible for, or you know, what you could be considered for your application? So if you haven't already, folks, and you're thinking about going into a scheme, your first port of call would be rural payments, and logging on to schemes, all schemes, and looking at the Agri-Environment scheme. If you click on eligibility, you'll then be able to put in your holding number, which comes up. You'll see just above the dark blue banner where next to the search box there, you put in your holding number, and from there, folks, it will bring up a list of what's available in your area now, or at your farm. What you get might be something different from somebody 2-3 miles down the road, or somebody that's the other end of the country. It's all strategically zoned for the farming, for how we farm. So you put your holding number in there, and it basically gives you a list of the different options, and it's a case of working through the list to see what is a viable option for you to consider. So what I'm going to do now is pass you on to Kathleen, and she is going to take you through some of these options. So Kathleen, do you want to come off mute?
Yep, I'm off mute.
Okie dokie.
Thanks, Kat.
Yep, no bother.
As Kat said, the first point of call is to go onto the Rural Payments website and just have a look. What can you do? Tonight we're going to look at these six most popular options that are most popular options we find that people want to do and can do in the Caithness area, or Caithness and Sutherland area that we cover. But within that, I'll use created hedge rules as an example. You might be able to get it, or your neighbour might be able to get it, but you might not. That there are certain options that are very specific to the area in which you farm. There, under the ACE option scheme, there are 9 different subheadings and of areas of management. So, for example, there's water, wetlands, there's grassland, arable, and there's other ones as well. And under those 9 options, there's over 50 different management options. But as we said, you know, some of them are just not available to everybody. But I'll now go through these kind of different options, giving you the high level information about them, what you're expected to do, what you can't do, and the amount of payment rate. But what I would say is that if any of your lands is designated, be that a SSSI, a SPA, an SAC, this land, you would have to consult Nature Scotland, formerly Scottish Natural Heritage, SNH, and get their buy-in to what you want to do. They have to approve any management on these areas, or they have to approve their management within the, if there's a wee slither of this and within the field, they still may need to be consulted about the proposed management. So we'll kick off having a look at species-rich grassland management. This has to be an established field area of species-rich. It doesn't have to take up the whole of the field. For example, if maybe half the field was species-rich and half was just in by grassland, you could choose to manage the whole field for species-rich, but you'd only be paid on the species-rich area. You have to complete a grazing plan. There is a grazing plan template on the Rural Payments website, and in that you have to explain when you're going to keep your stock out, when you're going to introduce them, how many, and it has to cover the full 12 months of the year. There are different options within species-rich grassland for cutting or grazing, or cutting and or grazing, but you're not allowed to put any inputs on the grassland. Generally, species-rich grassland is a poorer and unimproved grassland that's naturally occurring species in. And this could equate to nearly £110 a hectare if you choose that option. And that's as part of your application. Another one, and this is maybe one you've seen or your neighbours you've seen your neighbours, is Wader Graze Grassland Management. It's on the Region 1 grassland, so this is better quality, improved grassland. There's a choice of 3 grazing restrictions, and these are set out in the guidance for the option. 2 of those are a set 6-week period, starting the beginning of April for one of them and mid-April for the other one, or the other one is a lower stocking rate for a longer 3-month period, from 15th of March to the 15th of June. From the 15th of March to the 15th of May, you're not allowed to put on any inputs. So that's fertiliser, and that includes lime. And you can't top the field until after the 30th of June. And that payment rate comes in about £80 per hectare. Another one, if you're growing some arable crops, is winter stubbles, the management of winter stubbles. In this one, you can grow your crop just as you would normally would from sowing to harvest, but you're not allowed to use a desiccant, so you can't spray it off prior to harvest. After harvest, you can't do anything except maybe a bit of except some subsoiling until the 1st of March. So you can't go in with the plough again until the 1st of March, or you couldn't graze the area either. You're restricted to a maximum of 10 hectares per location code, but this option is different than the other ones in the fact that you could move it around the farm, just as with an arable rotation. You might decide first 3 years it's going to be in one field, but then in the second 5 years you've got to move it, moving it as part of your arable rotation. If you do choose to do that, you've got to keep the managed area above 90% of the original managed area. So there is a wee bit of thinking there in the long term. Where am I going to grow my crops? Just build that into your application. And that one comes in at £96 per hectare for a management payment. Another popular one, and you've probably heard farmers talking about this, is the mowing grassland, and this is for wildlife and waders. And these are generally your hay or your silage fields. You cannot roll, harrow or graze the field from the 1st of April, and then you can't cut it until the 1st of July. When you do cut it, it has to be cut in a wildlife friendly manner, so that allows the farmland waders to leave the field before the mower catches up with them. There should be no inputs on the field from the 1st of April to the 15th of May. So as Kat said, if you're thinking about making silage, if you're thinking, I want to get cut, I'm wanting to cut it in June, this option wouldn't maybe be for you. Again, with this mowing grassland as well, it's maybe something that is possible, but you'd have to put out your silage date. That one's coming in at just under £150 per hectare for management. Then we move on to water margins. Under the AICS options, there are two different types of water margins. There's grassland and arable. As you would think, grassland water margins are in grassland fields and arable margins are within fields of crop or cropping. The grazing rules differ because it depends on the width of your water margin. You're not allowed to, if you do graze the area with stock, ensure there's no poaching. You're not allowed to put any inputs, so no fertilizer or lime. The minimum width of the water margin is 3 meters from the edge of the bank, and that's the top of the bank. So if your ditch rises up, it's from the top of the bank. Again, the width of the water margin depends on the width of the water course itself. If it's just a narrow ditch, it's 3 meters, but if it's next to still water, it's a minimum of 12 meters. And this payment is just over £123 per hectare. Another popular one with farmers in Caithness who are available is created hedge rules. This year, in 2023, this has been restricted to a maximum of 500 metres of hedging, created hedging. The hedge is to be established in a double row, at least 2 metres wide, so it's a metre. The fence is to be, because the hedges have to be fenced off to ensure livestock or other vermin don't eat them. The fence has to be within no closer than 1 metre from the centre of the hedge, and it's 6 plants per metre. And you're not to trim the hedge between the 1st of December and the end of February, but you'd have to get the hedge growing before you could trim it, and that's £1.20 per metre. So that was just a quick run through there of some of the most popular options that people manage, that we find people manage within the scheme. There are lots of others, but those are the ones that majority of people will have within their scheme, and you've probably heard neighbours, friends talking about. As part of the AICS option scheme, there's also some capital items available. I spoke about creation of hedges. So to help with the cost of creating the hedge, there's £5.40 per metre towards planting the hedges. There's also £5.50 available for stock fencing, although a word of caution that stock fencing is harder to get within the scheme than in previous years. There's the last two things there is creation of scrapes and cutting of rushes. If you choose to do an option such as the mown grassland or the weed or graze grassland, this is two capital options you may consider, as this can be of benefit in the points section or accumulation of points towards your plan. As Kat mentioned, it is a competitive scheme, and the more points you can obtain would help you in the long run. And creation of scrapes and cutting of rushes, along with the mowing and graze grassland, can get you some extra points towards weeders. Under the AICS scheme, there's also a couple of options for small units. So this is if you have under 30 hectares of improved grassland, and the improved grassland is anything with the return to the hill dike. So it's your better grassland. It's not rough grazing. There's two payments or additional payments. It's conservation management of small units, and there's also the cattle management on small units, which we'll go on to look at now. So the conservation management of small units, is your holding has to be at least 5 hectares, not including rough grazing, and be less than 30 hectares. And you must manage at least 1 hectare of your land on 2 or more of the following. If you've got less than 5 hectares, it's only half a hectare. So there's a wild bird seed for farmland birds, forage brassica crops, the retention of winter stubbles, water and wildlife mown grassland, and the species-rich grassland. And that's an additional £77 per hectare, and that's on top of the management payments for those 5 above. So it's a little bit extra. If you're a small unit, a little bit of a boost for the scheme. There's also a possible payment towards cattle management on small units, and it can be the introduction or retention of native breeds or their first crosses. The payment is based on 1 cow per 2 hectares. Sorry. And you have to keep a specified number of cows for 5 years. And you have to specify that at the entry. The introduction of native breed cows is £162 a hectare, while the retention is £107. There is, just in case a cow was to, or she wasn't proving in calf, or you wanted to get rid of her, you do have to replace the cow, but there is a time period they allow for you to get a new one and get her home on the unit. And then there's the organic options. There is the support towards conversion, and you have to gain viability endorsement from SOPA, Soil Association, or another governing body. And then there's maintenance. That's for people that's already converted into organic, and it's just a maintenance payment towards, helping with costs. And on the next screen here, we have the payments, organic conversion payment rates per hectare. So it depends on the type of grassland you have. You can see there, the more, the better the ground, the more money it is. So fruit and vegetables, not sure if there'll be a lot of that in the area, but it's £400 per hectare at a conversion rate. Arable's 280, and then improved grassland 140, and improved grassland coming in at £12.50. And that's years 1 and 2, and then years 3 to 5. And if you were already converted, these would be your conversion payments rates, which is shown there. So it is significantly less in years 3 to 5 than the first 2 years, but the first 2 years 1 and 2 is an additional payment to help you in the conversion period. And then years 3 to 5, you'd be into your maintenance period. So that's a very quick run through some of the most popular options and a quick look at the small units and the organic. But please, if you've got any questions, get them in the chat, and I'll just pass you back to Kat now to carry on about the application process of AICS itself.
Thanks, Kathleen. So folks, Kathleen's just scratched the surface basically. As she said, there's over 50 different options. Those are the kind of key ones that we see in our local area. With being on Zoom tonight, I know we've got people from all different areas. It's not just everybody that's based in Caithness. That's a great thing about these Zoom meetings. You can join from anywhere. So we're obviously talking about the options that are quite specific to our area, but those that are out with the area, please do look on rural payments to see what the options are for yourselves. So we've touched a little bit on the habitats, the application process now. So what's all involved? How do we apply? So there are a few steps, folks, and depending on people's different abilities of maybe using a computer or using their knowledge of how they can create maps or modify maps that they've got, this is the kind of process that you need to follow. So the first thing that you want to look at is a farm environmental assessment. So the department want to see what is presently on your holding, all the improved, unimproved areas, any water margins, any moorland, any heath, all the different types of habitat that exist at the moment. And this would go into a map. Now, if you're thinking, oh, I don't know how to create a map, or where do I get a map from? I've only got a map from the department. You can modify the map that you have from your paper map. You can absolutely draw on that. The other option would be to go on to rural payments, and there's a mapping system within rural payments itself that has dramatically improved over the years. And it's a really good starting point to go in, put in your holding number, and it will pull up what your map is. So that will give you the basic outline of your boundary and all your fields, and you could use that as a starting point for your farm assessment. So that's kind of stage one you want to do. Then after you've decided the kind of areas that you think on your farm match the habitats and the criteria that you think you can meet, you want to then look at mapping those management maps and the fields that you have. So I think, as Kathleen said, with regards to like species rich, there might be pockets of areas within fields that have different habitats that go on within them, and that's absolutely okay. You just have to be able to make sure that you label them and show them on a management map. And the fields that aren't being managed, you obviously would leave them out. You wouldn't include them in. So yeah, a management map of all the areas across your holding. And again, something Kathleen touched on was grazing plans. Now, there's templates within rural payments for the grazing plans that are required for certain elements of the scheme. It's worth looking at them, folks, having a wee look at what the restrictions are across the board of each habitat. And then you would basically fill out, the document is there online. You would fill it out, putting in the areas. You have to take pictures of the habitats as they look at the time of you putting in the application. And then you just have to back it up with some wording about what the habitat looks like, how big the field is, the area, etc. VPS document, that is vulnerable species, priority species. So that's an additional document. Again, it is found on rural payments. You would complete this and fill it in for the points, to know what points you're going to get for the waders, for the birds. In addition to that, if there is any bird surveys that have taken place on your farm within the last couple of years, you can provide that information. There's a website, the BTO website, which kind of has a lot of the areas where bird surveys are carried out regularly, that you can go onto there, put in your postcode or your holding, have a wee look, see if there's the birds that we're looking to target within the AIC scheme. And if there is, you can provide that data and it gives you additional points when it comes to the scoring side. Again, something Kathleen mentioned, if you if any of your land is on a triple SI, a SPA, if any of it, or if you have a monument, a scheduled monument on your land, you have to touch base with Nature Scot and Historic Scotland if required, because they have an input into that particular area, and it can be quite heavily influenced whether that element can be put into the scheme or not. The other thing to consider as well is what we call a collaboration plan. Now, collaboration wasn't something that was about when this scheme first started, but as the scheme has rolled on, it's kind of morphed into different things. And if you can collaborate with anyone within a 5 kilometre radius of your own holding, you can put together a collaboration plan with your neighbours or the people round about you, just detailing what management is taking place and the waders that you hope to attract by the collaboration of all your fields and all your management together. Sometimes it's quite difficult to know if your neighbours or people nearby are in a scheme or planning on going into a scheme. For those that are going in for 2025 round, you'd be looking at your neighbours that are looking to go in that year and those that were successful in the year just past. So a collaboration plan together can gain you additional points, folks. So that's the main documentation on the areas that Kathleen has touched on. So there's lots of different other templates and plans that may need to be completed depending on what you plan to manage. So scoring, we've talked that it is a scoring-based system. So there is a score sheet, folks, that you can input your details into. It looks at the amount of land you plan to manage, if you can link any of your habitats together. So for example, if you have a field that is perhaps weed or grazed, the field next to it is maybe a mown field, or you're looking to manage a water margin, or there's species rich, or there's habitat mosaic, and they all kind of link together or bolt closely together, you can gain additional points by the linking of different management. If you have standalone fields dotted all over the place, that's very difficult to gain any additional scores on or any points on for the scoring. You want to try and have it linked. It's quite key, folks, and you can gain quite a few extra points through linkage. If you can look to alleviate any diffuse pollution, there's points to be gained by that. Diffuse pollution being perhaps open ditches, open water margins where livestock are able to access it. Yes, I know maybe people use that for drinking water, but that is that is seen as a pollution risk. So if you can alleviate any pollution, that goes in your favour in the score sheet as well. The amount of capital versus the management. So there's a kind of ratio that goes on with if you're looking to put in perhaps a lot of hedging and you need a lot of fencing to protect that hedging because you need it double fenced. There's a kind of limitation, folks, on the percentage of capital that you can have against your management options. So it's something to be aware of when you go to put your application together. As I said just a moment ago, collaboration, there's additional points that can be gained through the collaboration. Your vulnerable species points through the birds that you can attract. So this is all things that when you're looking at putting your application together, how can you influence your application to be as strong as it possibly can? Things that are out with your control is, as I said, if you deal with Nature Scot or Historic Scotland, if you have any monuments, triple SIs, you are at their mercy whether they say that that field can be managed or not, or that area around a monument can be managed or not. So that's basically how the scoring works. So guys, we have given you an absolute whistle stop ride of aches basically, but I'm hoping that might have scratched the surface. I think that's probably all we've done. I can see there's quite a few questions starting to come in. So if you want to put anything in the chat or the QA box, please do. And we will start working our way through the questions. Kathleen, did you want to come off mute?
Yep.
Yep. And
I've got one to kick off.
Yep, on you go. Yep, no rhyme or reason to questions, folks. Just fire them at us, and we'll work our way through them.
So yeah, as we both said it's a competitive scheme, and somebody's asked, what kind of level of points would they need to get into the scheme?
Okay.
Do you want to go that one?
Yeah, sure, Kathleen. So what happens, folks, is all the applications go in and we are blindsided. We have no idea what the threshold is or what the points is going to be. It changes annually. What I can say is for the applications that have just gone in at the tail end of last year, the points threshold was 21 points that had to be scored. So anything over and above 21, if it met all the criteria, yep, they got in. Anything that scored below that, unfortunately, didn't make the round. So this year passed 21, but we don't know what it will be next year or when this round closes because they take all the applications in and then they do a bit of a benchmarking.
Yep.
Okay.
Another one. We maybe didn't cover this, but it's because there's a wee bit of more background to it, or quite a lot to it. But can you apply as a subtenant of a croft? And can you apply on an apportionment of the common grazings?
Do you want to say that one, Kathleen?
Yeah. So, yes, you could apply as a subtenant of croft. Tenants, if you are a owner occupier or a full tenant of the croft, you can apply because you will have control of the land for at least 5 years of the scheme period. If you're the subtenant, it would depend if your tenancy as a subtenant, you would also be in control over that 5 years. If you had a piece of land that you had leased, say it was for 5 years, you had a short-term lease on it, and it was coming to an end after the scheme would only cover the first 3 years of this of the lease would only cover the first 3 years of the scheme, you'd have to get something signed, a form, again, it's on the RPNS website, to say that the landlord would take it back. They would, if they took the land back in hand, they would carry on the management. Maybe following on from that, you know, if you decided you went into the scheme, after 4 years in the scheme, you decided, I've had enough, I'm selling up, I'm just, you know, had enough. You can pass the contract on to the incomer. It's called a successor, and you know, they can take the land and they then do receive the payments for it, but they would have to sign up as a successor. So yeah, you can, as a subtenant on a croft, you would be able to, you would need to put in some documentation to show that along with your application, but as long as it's through the Crofting Commission, I wouldn't see any problems.
Thanks, Kathleen. Okay, I've got one here. I'm not sure if you can see it on my screen. Can you see the chat on my screen, Kathleen?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, okay, so you maybe see there, we've got somebody here that has 3 crofts, 2 are a mixture of arable and improved grassland, which equates to 25 hectares, excluding common grazing shares. The third croft is 152 hectares. It's all rough moorland, although it is all in by ground, no hill share with it. Does the third croft prevent me accessing the small unit option? The answer to that is, if it's all under the same holding number, then yes, it would. You wouldn't be classed as a small holding, I'm afraid. I hope that answers the question. Another one that's come in, technical term. If my fencing is knackered, can I apply for fencing through the scheme? Yes and no. Fencing, they've tightened up the rules on fencing quite substantially, folks. I'm sure as many people have driven around about the county, they'll see lots of new fencing over the years that's gone up across, you know, a lot of farms, a lot of crofts, etc. But what they're doing now is that they've stripped back that remit. It's not as easy to get fencing if your fence is just knackered or falling apart or dilapidated. You'd have to have a real good reason for replacing the fence. And with the way that it's working now and the capital against the management, you wouldn't be able just to put up a nice new fence between a wader grazed field and a wader mown field. You could, however, look at putting up fencing where you're putting in hedges, where we said there's the 500 metres of fencing. So they've really tightened up on the fencing, I'm afraid, folks. But when you go to do an application, it's worth considering, but bear in mind that it might then have a knock-on effect to your points, your raw points and your scoring.
Yeah, thanks. Here's another one. This is somebody who is already in the scheme and they're in year 2 of 5. They're asking, are they able to apply for just hedgerow creation this year? I can.
Yeah,
you want to?
Yeah, on you go, Kathleen. Yeah,
right,
sure.
Yeah. By all means, you can have 2 schemes running, starting at different points. Sometimes it's just you've not put enough in, or sometimes people get more land and they decide they want to put the management on that field. There's nothing stopping you having more than 1 scheme running at one time. The only thing would be, though, if you were just thinking about one option, and the question's just come in thinking about for just hedgerow creation, so I'm assuming that it is just for hedgerow creation. It might be that you don't get enough points to be eligible for, you know, to get a new scheme, to get a new contract.
Yeah, it'd be very difficult to get to meet the threshold. If you think that this time around you needed 21 points, and getting those 21 points was through the linkage, through the collaboration, to do it under one management would be very, very difficult.
Another, I would just draw your attention to Hedgerows and trees don't sit easily, or they don't sit easily with the weeder options. So that's mown grassland, the weeder grazed grassland, and there's another heath on weeders. If there's management within 30 meters of a hedge or tree, it depends on what your original application and how you obtained your points for it to get it. It might not sit well with it. So it's something to maybe go back to your agent and double check with as well. There is, I did write it down. If you got points for vulnerable species, and weeder birds are vulnerable species, you cannot claim management option payments to benefit weeders on land within 30 meters of established trees and hedges, and they don't want you to create a hedge either, because the raptors sit in the trees and hedges and can't go after the weeders. But on another turn, if you're nowhere near weeder fields and you're just thinking maybe some hedging, you can do hedging under the crofting grant scheme, but if you're not eligible for crofting grant scheme, there are organisations that can give out free hedge plants, and I've got the person who sent it in. I've got your name, so I can maybe see if we can email you over some details. So it's maybe something that maybe not through the scheme, and not maybe as much as you're looking for, but maybe get some hedge plants from somewhere.
Thanks, Kathleen. Somebody just asked a little bit more about how the collaboration works. So basically, folks, as I said before, there's if there's anybody that's going into the scheme the same time as yourself that's putting in an application or hoping to put in an application, it's a 5-kilometre radius in that area, and anybody can collaborate as part of the application process. So it's a separate document that has to be completed with your details and the fields, the areas that you're managing, along with your neighbours or the people in that area, the amount of land that they're also managing for waders. And you also have to provide a map, of the areas that show all the collaboration and where it's taking place. So it's part of the application process. If you know of a neighbour that's planning on going into a scheme, or somebody that maybe went in last year, it's definitely worth touching base with them, because you would gain points and they would also gain points from your application too, if your applications were successful. So yeah, collaboration is definitely one to have a wee think about. So yeah, it can definitely give some additional points.
I suppose we never maybe mentioned that part of the application process, there is a bit online you have to do, just with all RPID schemes. There's an online part of the application process as well.
Yeah, the actual application.
Yeah, when you actually go to do it. But the time-consuming bit is doing your grazing management plans and all the other maps and management maps and other things that have to be done beforehand. And then once you've got them all gathered together, doing the end bit, getting on the computer is really, well, I find anyway, relatively quick. It's getting everything gathered together on the computer.
Yeah, it's all the information that's needed, isn't it? I
think there's something just come in. Start off with the easier one. Is the lime and fertilizer application in the mown and grazed options just between the dates or for the whole year? So yeah, it's just between the dates we mentioned, and it's really to prevent any ground nesting birds from being hurt by tractors, etc. So out with that, you're free to apply lime, fertilizer, farmyard manure, slurry, out with that period, and just got, and adhere to any other dates there are to do with cutting, etc.
One has come in there about the cost of a plan.
Yep.
So folks, having a plan carried out by yourself would be your own time, obviously. It would take you to do it. plans aren't through us ourselves at SAC here. Plans are looked at on an individual basis because we would work it out on the percentage of your overall scheme on what we charge to carry out an application, submit an application on your behalf. But the hope is after tonight, people would maybe have a wee stab at doing it, or certainly having a look online and you know, having a look, see if it's something that they could possibly do themselves. If it's not, and it's something you want to consider, that there are you know, other agents as well as ourselves that do carry out applications, do fill out application forms. So I can't give you a definitive price. It would be on a kind of one-to-one basis and what is being managed and what the overall cost of the scheme comes out at for you.
Yeah, Kat, there's one here as well. Can we give a bit of info on the access to historic sites? I think
Access
to historic sites. I think you mentioned that was in it.
Oh, yeah, there was the access. So without me pulling it up onto rural payments to get you the exact information, I can send it across to you. That's no problem at all. I'll send across what information I have on that if anybody wants that. Sorry, folks, I should have said after tonight, I will send out the slide pack to everybody that's present on the call tonight, as well as links to likes of the BTO, the email addresses for SNH and for Historic Scotland. Can also send out links for the access and other additional bits and pieces that we think might be really useful to you to have a look at. So yeah, so I'll send that link out to you. That's no problem at all. Anything else there, Kathleen?
I was just going to say on Historic Scotland, similar to SNH or Nature Scot, sorry, you have to contact them if you're going to think about doing any management on a site. Mm-hmm. You have to contact them and get their approval. Fencing, if you were doing fencing within a site, you would have to speak to them first as well. Again, yeah. It's a generic email address for them.
Okay. Yeah. Folks, any last questions or anything else, Kathleen? Sorry.
I was just going to say Historic Scotland, you'll know if you have one on your land, because you know Historic Scotland's probably been round or sent you a letter at the very least about the site, and just mentioning that they have it or they're coming to look at it. So you're probably aware if you have got one.
Yeah. Okay. So folks, like all our Zoom meetings that we hold and all our face-to-face meetings, there's always an evaluation or a feedback form that we ask if everyone can take the time to fill out. That'll probably be emailed out to you in the next few days, folks. For all those that do return it, and we really appreciate if you could take the time just to complete it. You are entered into a prize draw for a voucher for a bakery, or Damn Delicious it's called. So yeah, if you don't mind filling out the evaluation form. But as always, folks, if you have any questions after tonight's meeting, or you go away and you have a wee think and you want some additional support, some information, by all means you can go through the FAS help desk, or you can email advice@fas.scot. A lot of people on the call know who Kathleen and I are that attend our Women in Ag meetings. So folks, you can reach out to us through email or pick up the phone and give us a shout, and we will absolutely do what we can to try and help you or give you any extra assistance or guidance that you might well need. But if there's no more questions, I would just like to thank you for your time this evening. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else that's come in. No, don't think so.
I don't think so.
Okay, folks, so I hope that has maybe given you a little bit of an insight into the environmental scheme potential, maybe got your brain working overdrive, what might be a viable options for you on your own holdings, or maybe you've just looked at it and thought, oh no, this is not for me. But I hope it's maybe answered some of the questions that you might have had before you joined the call tonight. Say if not, and we can be of any further assistance, folks, please just give us a shout. Thank you for dialing in this evening, and take care and enjoy the rest of your night.